everyone, and welcome back to Multifamily Talks. You'll notice I'm in a different location. I'm in our studio, and I am your host, Krista Hurley. And today we're diving into a topic that Multifamily Talks Live is a video series that you can expect monthly, talking about all things multifamily here on LinkedIn. Think live, candid conversations in more bite-sized format. And if you can't tune in, don't worry. You can watch or listen to the replay using the link below or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And make sure to follow us on LinkedIn so you don't miss out on any new conversations. And please don't forget, ask as many questions as you can in the comment section for our guest speakers. And speaking of those, I'm thrilled to be joined today by two of our top minds in technology and governance, Lance French, our Chief Information Officer, and Kris Kimmerle, VP of AI Risk and Governance. Now, as AI adoption accelerates across the multifamily industry, the stakes are higher than ever, from protecting resident data to ensuring responsible innovation. Today's conversation will explore how leaders can confidently embrace AI while safeguarding their operations and trust. So thank you so much for joining us today, Lance and Kris. Please tell the audience a little bit about yourselves. Lance, how about you first?
Well, Krista, first off, thank you so much for having me. And it's great to be here with Kris Kimmerle, who leads our AI governance. Multifamily Talks is one of my favorite series, and certainly AI is top of mind. I serve as the CIO for RealPage, and I've been here about 4 years. Prior to that, I was in a leadership role at Salesforce, as well as transportation. And there I focused on the Internet of Things, data science, data platforms, and innovation, heavily around AI, both in IT, but also in engineering. Relevant to this discussion today, I have responsibility for IT risk and governance, AI governance and enablement. And you'll hear a phrase that Kris and I will talk to called RAI, R-A-I, which is responsible AI. And that's near and dear to our hearts, both in products we put externally to our customers and also how we enable AI internally. I have responsibility for our internal center of excellence for AI, which is really enabling our employees, but also processes that support our customers. For example, if a customer needs help or has an issue that they need resolved through our customer support operation, or professional services where we help our customers through implementation. So certainly glad to be here with you and looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks. I just learned that about Salesforce, Lance. So thank you for sharing the background with everybody. So Kris, over to you. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, and I am so happy to be here with you, Krista and Lance. It's a huge honor. I'm a new employee at RealPage. I joined a little over 4 months ago, and it has been nothing but exciting. I lead AI risk and governance, and a little bit about my background. Before coming to RealPage, I was at Aon, where I helped establish their AI governance function, and I was the principal resource for AI security across the board. And before that, a lot of my background's rooted in cybersecurity. And so that is security architecture, consultation. I operated as a field V and VCISO for some time. And at RealPage, really my focus is all about how we think about AI risks, how we go after this from a committee and a governance function. I actually chair our governance committee, which is really around steering and helping navigate through enterprise-wide AI risk decisions that would impact the entire organization. Operationalizing our safeguards. AI is extremely complex, has a lot of nuances. We have to protect these things, not only for our employees, but most importantly, for our customers. And compliance is a very difficult space in AI today. It's very important to ensure that we're compliant, not just with, automation laws or generative AI or traditional machine learning legislation that's coming out of either industry or federal sectors, but we also have to worry about, the upcoming laws that would come from states or specific municipalities. But it's nothing short of an amazing team, an amazing organization, and I look forward to sharing more as we jump into the talk.
Awesome. Well, let's get us started. So Lance, I'm going to go over to you to kick things off on the why behind this conversation. So how would you describe the current state of AI in multifamily?
It's an interesting question. And as I think about AI and multifamily, it's been here for years. In fact, RealPage has been a leader in AI. All of our models around data science, decision-making, intelligence all throughout multifamily. When we know that a couple of years ago, something changed, the invent or bringing about generative AI. And there's really been an unprecedented expansion, as we all know. We refer to it at RealPage as a technology supercycle. And we've never seen adoption or growth as quickly as this is moving. Think about things like the internet, cell phones. They move quickly, but this is clearly outpacing by multiple times those cycles. And we all saw it start with things like ChatGPT, where we could go online and kids were doing their homework and teachers were thinking, whoa, how did we go from a C to an A? But then we started seeing more advanced models and began to use them in multifamily. You see that at RealPage through our Lumina chat, where in our products, we could help our customers understand how to, and in some cases, even take actions. We found that to be incredibly useful in the affordable space. But now we see something different, oftentimes referred to as agents or agentic AI. And RealPage just introduced our Lumina workforce. And from our standpoint, there's immense possibilities. And I see that throughout our industry with the customers we talk to, with the industry forums that we're engaged with. There's so much excitement. And it's really focused in two areas, the resident experience, so how we can change that. And one great example is accessibility to information, making sure that it's 24/7 where we can support that, and multiple languages, multiple outlets. So whether I consume on a phone or through a chat or through voice, I can support that. The second side is for operators and owners, the corporate, the site staff, to make their experience better. And we very much see agentic AI as a support of humans, not necessarily a replacement, which, that's sort of the other side of the equation. As you talk about AI and multifamily, you also hear a lot of fear, a lot of caution, a lot of unknown questions. Well, what does this mean to my job? Is this really effective? How do I know my data is safe? How do I protect myself if I'm using AI? And we think that's very important. And for us, we believe it matters how you approach agentic AI. And so we, of course, see it as good. And we see good for our industry. We see good in segments that we serve. We see a completely different experience in the future. But we also have our eyes wide open, frankly. And I think most of our customers do, because while we have access to this technology, bad actors do as well. And so for us, it requires really dual investments. One, let's develop the most effective, well-governed, secure AI that we can. And at the second time, let's invest protecting our customers. And that's things from data, regulatory compliance, AI effectiveness, how we put guardrails. And that, I think, also makes RealPage somewhat distinct, that we are really thinking about it in those two different ways. Finally, I'll close this question, Krista, with I serve on the steering committee for RETC, the Real Estate Technology Transformation Center. And we talk so much about AI, and I can just, again, emphasize so much possibility, but also, and I think, warranted caution. Make sure that we're doing it right and we're protecting ourselves.
I love that. And I'm going to take it back to two things that you said. And one is the acronyms, right? So RealPage loves their acronyms. In fact, we have a cheat sheet that is, I think the Excel spreadsheet has hit like the 7,000 line. Like, we really have a lot of acronyms here. But you mentioned two. You said Gen AI, and then you mentioned Ray. Am I saying that right? Did you say Ray? Yes. Okay. So this question I'm going to punt over to you, Kris. Can you tell us, we hear a lot about responsible AI or Ray. Can you tell us what that means to you and what this audience really needs to be thinking about?
Absolutely, Krista. So, as Lance hit on, responsible AI is arguably one of the most important things that any organization could go after, whether they are building these systems, adopting them, is ensuring that they're introducing this kind of philosophy through every fabric of their organization. So let me talk a little bit about what responsible AI means to us at RealPage. We categorize this into 6 pillars, which is fairly common, and that's fairness. How do we strive to build AI systems that treat all people equitably? Reliability and safety. Are our systems consistently and safely performing under both expected and unexpected conditions? Privacy and security. Have we done what we need to do, not just to secure models, but what about our architecture, the data, our integration or embedding of these systems? And knowing they're non-deterministic, how do we control what they do and limit, as Lance would say, the degrees of freedom that we give these models? Are we transparent? Are we accountable? And have we included human-centric principles in our design from the very get-go? This really constitutes what responsible AI means. And for RealPage and for other companies operating in our industry, really what this means is better outcomes when you apply these practices and these principles and this philosophy for both residents, owners, operators. It gives them assurance and trust that what you're doing is in their best interests, that we're thinking about this holistically. And I really think the stakes could not be higher. I mean, screening decisions, pricing algorithms, agentic AI, and access to housing, all of these things are extremely consequential, and they affect people and their livelihood in a way that is material. We have to take these things very seriously. And I think that's one of the areas I'm most proud about when it comes to RealPage is the team doesn't rest on this. We challenge ourselves every single day, every single feature within our product to ask, did we do the right thing here? Does this make sense? Does this align to our principles? And it's important. At the end of the day, coming through this exercise is going to lead to a bunch of healthy practices, and it's going to lead us to where we want to be as far as how we're deploying this technology and our ability to kind of create a position and help lead the industry towards the appropriate path.
I personally am super proud of that, that we're doing things right. Responsible AI is not something that only RealPage should be talking about. It should be everywhere. So thanks for that, Kris. I know that everybody might be a little shy on this subject, right? We're talking about safety and security and stuff, but please add your comments to ask the audience here a question, or even myself if you wanted to. So we'd love to engage with you guys. And last time on Multifamily Talks, you guys just came on to say hi. Like, hey, Dennis, remember when Dennis was here? So please just add those comments, say hi, and I'll shout you out. So on to the next thing that I said, Lance, I had two comments for you. The second one is you mentioned the framework. I really want to lean on that and ask you, we've developed a very strong framework of our AI, but can you walk us through that and how it's helping us scale the responsibility and security way that Kris has been outlining?
Yes. And we've been very focused on a systematic way of approaching risk and governance around AI. And again, as I mentioned, that's in the products that we deliver, as well as how we consume internally. And it's important for us because we work in verticals where we're working with data like prospect information or resident information, PII, information that's financially relevant. We're also in very heavily regulated businesses, so those verticals matter. But we also work horizontally across the end-to-end resident journey, all the way from the very beginning, as we're going through the leasing prospect, all the way to a resident life cycle, to finally, potentially a move out, and then any post activity. So critically important, we understand all of that vertically as well as horizontally. The other thing that's been happening is things are moving so fast, as first talked about, whether it's federal regulations, state regulations, local, as well as policy, some of which hasn't even been finalized yet. So at RealPage, we're working to make sure we're influencing that, but also illustrating a very systematic approach or framework. Now, what Kris has brought to us is even some additional components. So I'll talk about several of them. One is visibility. So we spend a lot of time making sure that any AI model, even the traditional models that we've been working in for years, understand what they are, how they work, what data they contain, but then also where they might go awry if we don't have the right mitigating controls in place, and we test those on a regular basis. So if we don't know about it, we can't control it. So very important. The second is how we control it. And so, of course, we have software, we have different things that we audit the results that our models produce, but we're consistently and continually investing to do more in this space because we're not going to be satisfied. We're relentless about improving operations, how we make sure that our models are working effectively, but also tune them. And frankly, this is important because the voice of the customer, be it a resident or operations, is really important so that we can continue to tune and improve them to be more effective, but also more responsible. Compliance, as I mentioned, critically important. And for us, we're also partnering with companies like OneTrust to not only understand what's in place today, but what's likely coming. And so if there are regulations that we need to be considering, we don't want to be reactive. We want to be proactive. And that's really supporting our customers to make sure that we're putting all, not just RealPage, our full ecosystem into this approach. Enablement is a big component for us finally, and then our strategy. And I'll just have to say strategy as part of this framework is critically important because if you don't come in with a strategy that says, I'm going to have responsible, secure, effective AI, you can put features out really quickly. And you see that all the time. There's a new startup that's announced, seems like daily. And that's one investment path, but you have to do these other things. If you're really thinking about how do I leverage AI responsibly over the next 2, 3, 4 years as you build out.
I love that. Definitely, the right now is easy to catch, right? But it's that long tail that you're trying to chase. So I'm going to force the keyboards of our listeners here to say a poll and ask them, as your organization adopts AI, what is your biggest concern? You can say things like data privacy and security, lack of internal expertise, or maybe regulatory compliance, or I hope no one says this, but we're not using AI at all. Just because of how fast we're moving, I highly doubt that that's even out there. But hey, I'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you. So please enter those responses and even just a hey or a question to Lance and Kris to get the conversation continuing. Of course, I have a lot of questions, so I'll kick over to the next one and just pause on, we've talked a lot about ensuring you're in the know, right? Knowledge is power. Leaning into the education. And Lance, you even had mentioned RETSI, the real estate technology arm of NMHC. A growing number of multifamily operators are actively deploying AI across the leasing, maintenance, and resident engagement, as you've mentioned. Yet many leaders still cite a lack of internal understanding and governance clarity as that top barrier to the adoption. So I'm going to ask Kris, actually. Sorry, Lance. But with that in mind, how do you approach educating internal teams and clients about AI governance in a way that's both accessible but actionable?
So I think the most important thing you can do, and it's a great question, Krista, it's the most important thing here would be to approach that with some level of humble, grounded, down-to-earth guidance and direction to the teams.
I love that.
The more you learn, the less you realize, or the more you realize, the less you know, if you will. And I think this really comes down to there's no really inopportune time to get into this, to understand it. I would encourage anyone and everyone to really think about AI, invite it to the table when you can at work, in your personal life, get as familiar as you can with this. That's probably one of the best ways to get a little bit more accessible or make this more accessible, start to understand the upper and lower bounds of what this technology can do. And what we do is we just assume that there's an opportunity here to share and a little bit of over communicating at RealPage. So when we're interacting with teams, which are, again, fantastic, we make sure that we're speaking from a taxonomy, a shared common language, a glossary, if you will, and we're all talking from the same sheet of music. And when we go into a specific issue or we're trying to overcome a specific challenge, that we all have at least the basis of language to lean back on. Because if you do not have that, you're not going to be able to understand, or you're going to reach some kind of impasse when it comes to a specific technical hiccup, something within the software's composition, something within a technique that you're applying to a system. So having your words and being a little bit pedantic is important, and then making sure that you're compensating or at least aligning to the audience. Within the AI governance function, we work with InfoSec, our cybersecurity team, across very technical issues, our developers and engineers. We also work with legal, marketing, sales, and the rest of the business services that are either supporting or pushing AI outside of RealPage or within. So this requires a whole spectrum of being able to go up and down the stack. It's a difficult exercise, but again, approaching it with the sense that we're all in this together. Here are the things that we should know. And then making sure that it's very clear to the teams as we think about AI, its life cycle or a specific stack, making sure that we understand we want to accelerate, we want to move quickly, but we need to make safe the default path. And it really comes when we bring people up, and you're going to see these benefits where specific teams or individual contributors that are all-stars that leverage AI, you're going to see them accelerate. What I think is kind of lost often is when you build up the organization, compounding effects occur. So when one team moves really quick, that's great. But what if you move a division at faster speeds? They can respond to emails better. They can produce collateral better. They can process information faster. If you start doing this through departments to entire wings of your company, you're going to find that the whole business starts moving faster. They start moving in a reliable way, especially if you've implemented responsible AI practices throughout that journey.
Something that you said on the education piece, that, the more that you educate yourself, the better for, just everyone. But recently, I was reminded about one of our panelists at Real World that said that somebody had posed a question about, what about this fear mongering of AI is going to take my job? And that person's response was, transcendent for me. They said, the AI is not going to take your job, but the person who educates themselves on how to utilize AI could. And that aligns perfectly with what you were just stating in terms of, everybody just onboarding their own AI education and then expanding and compounding out of that. I love that. Thank you for sharing. We do have a
Kris,
comment.
I just one comment on that as well. I think it's very easy to fall into fear, uncertainty, doubt, or the feeling of missing out. FUD and FOMO are overly prevalent in generative AI. It's really important to get as close to this technology as possible, because that is how these concerns and fears quickly get dismissed.
Yeah.
There is no shortage of hype in all of the news media right now. And if you want to kind of understand what's real, start using it.
Yeah.
Get a sense for what it can do.
I love that. Okay, so thank you, Adam Hepworth, founder of Della. He asks, how do you stop AI from confusing personalization with surveillance? So it knows that a resident's needs without crossing the line into too much. That's a good question. I don't know, Lance or Kris, whoever wants to take that. Okay, great.
I can absolutely take that. And it's a great question. And it's really interesting because as we talk about at RealPage, we're not just working in one vertical. We think of the full resident life cycle. So in the Lumina workforce, we expect we'll service one area, but then we'll also look further into that life cycle. So whether it's operations, communicating with a prospect or with a resident, or whether it's facilities or even our finance agents. And that question is spot on. The way we're approaching it is really two ways. One, we think of our agents just like we would think of identity for a human, which means that you have to have the proper identity access management in place so that data can only be viewed or utilized according to those permissions. And that doesn't have to happen often, because the easiest way to access models and data is just simply to give access. But for us, we very much want to make sure that our agent is working very closely with the human counterpart and is seeing the right information. So that's part one. And that's a very difficult thing to do because it adds complexity into your agent flows. The second component, and Kris said this earlier, but it's degrees of freedom that you allow your agent. Because one of the risks of using these reasoning models and non-deterministic models is they can go off and determine things maybe they shouldn't. So in order to stop that, one, it's data that you allow it to access, and then it's guardrails around conclusions or findings. And so you can guard against that with competence indicators. You can guard against that with agents that serve as a judge. And so there's a whole host of things that we embed, as well as making sure that where it's appropriate, there's a human in the loop, either for approval or for assistance. So great question, difficult task, but very proud of how we're approaching it to make sure that those agents, again, very powerful, but we also have to make sure that they're controlled the right way.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Chris,
Yeah.
is it okay if Lance just nailed that. And I really want to just emphasize something. I love that response. When we think about how we ensure that, the question here is around, are we collecting enough information? At what point are we helping or starting to become some kind of surveillance function? Well, first, these systems aren't behaving or operating outside of how IT works, which is to say there's a decision all throughout how we construct, how we process information through this, and what specifically these things do. So if we think about data, Lance hit on this really well. We practice minimization. So what does minimization mean? That means collecting only what we need. And then when we think about what we have collected, how do we limit that to only what it is supposed to be used for? And then how do we apply the proper retention rules for this? Beyond that, how are we providing clear communication, transparency around what an agent's doing, what we're doing as far as serving in that space? All of these threads follow through with every decision we make about our products, making sure that that kind of transparency and that notice is well within the remit of our customers, that they have not only an understanding, but control over the information that is coming back and forth between these systems and what they need to do.
Very well
That's a good
said.
question.
Yeah, it was a good question. Thank you, Adam, for engaging. And thank you both for joining me today. I know that Multifamily Talks is meant to be a short snippet, so I'm teasing the audience with your presence, but I do applaud you both. Thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you all for joining Multifamily Talks Live. Again, you can continue watching us here. We're excited to continue this series and offer up valuable conversations and topics that you can expect monthly. So make sure to follow us on LinkedIn for those updates or upcoming live conversations. And we hope everyone enjoyed today's deep dive into AI governance and how to stay ahead in multifamily. Thanks, and see you next month.